Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Ryan Cooper here, Director of Partner Ecosystem at Device42. I have alongside me Ian as well from Device42. If you want to do a quick introduction, Ian.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ian Kay. I'm a solutions architect at Device42. I've been here 3 years, so I'm assigned on the pre-sale side to help with demonstrations, technical questions, and evaluations of the product.
Excellent. And today we'll be covering Abraham's Consulting on our webinar jointly with Device42, providing an overview. From the Abraham side, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Sure, thank you. This is Angela Gibson, of course, and we're grateful to have you join us in our webinar today as we explore this concept. I'm sorry, we have some noise in our background here, but I'm looking forward to sharing with you what we have to present. Abraham's Consulting focuses on hardware and software reselling, these solutions, of which Device42 is one of them, in the area of storage, security, and networking, managed services, and technical staffing. And with that, I'm going to have Ian. I'm going to give the mic back over to Ian and Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us.
I didn't know she was one of them.
And Ian, if you want to go and do an overview of the Device42, we'll go and dive in on this.
I guess.
Sounds good. All right. So thanks everybody for joining. This is the Device42 platform. So the intention there is to help you find anything you're looking for quickly based on whatever you type in. So host names, serial numbers, UUIDs, software packages will all get your results pretty quickly. A couple ways to get data into Device42. We do have a robust API that is publicly available and documented. It's tied to a live demo server and Swagger compliant so that you can play around with it, see what it can do for you, get an idea of what the endpoints look like, and see sample responses and API calls. So this is a good way to do scripting, to do automation, things with PowerShell or via the command line. So it's, again, a good way to get things in and out in bulk. Anything you can do through the UI, you can also do through the API as well. So here's a sample protocol that you can use to hit the device endpoint and get data about the different devices in your Device42 instance. And here's a sample response as well. Another option is a spreadsheet import-export option. If you're tracking anything in CSV or Excel today, or if you have another tool, another platform that we don't have a built an out-of-the-box integration with, you can use a CSV import to get information in. So we have sample spreadsheets that have built-in API headers that leverages those same API endpoints. And it's also a good way to do bulk data management. You can export all of your devices or all of your racks, or all of your IP addresses, make a change to that spreadsheet, re-import it, and it will apply all of those changes for you automatically. But really, kind of the pride and joy of Device42 is our agentless discovery. It's something that we're really proud of and put a lot of time and effort to from a development and product perspective. These are all of the different modules that are, all the different discovery options that are available. And so there's probably things that you see here related to other tools, right? So things like discovery of your virtual farms via some kind of hypervisor like VMware or Citrix or Hyper-V. Linux, Unix, and Windows devices are all options. We use SNMP for your network devices, but we'll also start to discover all sorts of other objects, including TLS and SSL certificates, so that you can always be aware of when certificates are coming up for expiration, get ahead of renewing those certificates so that none of your applications go down or are unsecure. We'll interact with various cloud vendors and get instance metadata for various cloud services in AWS, Azure, GCP, a couple other ones as well. We can pull DNS zone records, warranty information for a couple different hardware manufacturers, and storage arrays as well. So this is a relatively new feature of Device42. It gets pretty granular details about various storage arrays and SAN switches in the environment. And so this is something that we'll take a look at over the course of the session today as well. We do try to make the discovery really easy to set up and manage. Each of the jobs is going to require just a handful of parameters to be filled in. This job in particular is usually pretty heavily used in most use cases, most environments. It's going to discover all of those virtual platforms as well as anything running Unix, Linux, or Windows. Those could be enterprise architecture, running Windows 2019 data center server, could be a Windows 10 laptop, could be a MacBook, could be a AWS EC2 instance. All of these can be pulled in through this job. And so as far as what's required to get that job up and running, you'll have to give it a name, select an option from the platform dropdown, and this is effectively the operating system or the device type that you're discovering against. So we'll go with Windows in this case, and then enter in your discovery targets. And this can be as narrow in scope or as broad as needed. So a lot of flexibility when creating those jobs. So I can use a single IP like this. I could use a hyphenated range, a comma separated list, or even a subnet using CIDR notation. So again, lots of room to create those jobs as needed. Again, all of the discovery is agentless. So we do use credentials to authenticate the machines, run commands and gather that data. We do take a principle of least privilege approach. Those credentials will get associated here. You don't need a root account on the Linux side. You don't need a domain or local admin account on the Windows side. For SNMP, it just requires a read-only community string. Same thing on the hypervisor side. A read-only account is the only thing that's required. Same for storage discovery also. As far as requirements, that's all you need. Everything else is optional to fine-tune the discovery, make it fit your environment a little better. If you wanted to get deeper into the machines and start to discover things like software and services, applications that are running, these are all options. Discovering virtual machines on those hypervisors is also a possibility. If there are naming conventions that you want to conform to from within your environment, whether it's the short name versus the FQDN, these are all, again, possibilities and can be modified or changed at any point. You don't have to know them up front. You can save the job, come back and modify it later, or just run it once on demand and then get rid of it. We do recommend running that discovery on a schedule. Typically once a day is sufficient to keep the data in Device42 and the CMDB up to date, keep it fresh, make sure we're picking up any new software packages that are installed or maybe a new IP address is assigned. But of course, you can modify that to fit your needs too. If you want to run it every few days or every, multiple times a day, those are also options. So what does that data look like in Device42 once discovery has been running? So we'll look at a couple different device types here to kind of get a full understanding of what Device42 can offer you. But regardless of the device type, the operating system, the location, this is pretty representative, this first record that we're looking at here in terms of the data that's collected and how it's presented. Device42 is vendor agnostic, so we're not going to treat Windows over Mac any better than Linux or network devices, virtual versus physical, Dell versus Cisco, anything like that. So what we have here is a physical ESXi host in our environment here. Each device record is going to start with a lot of general inventory information. So things like the host name, the serial number, the UUID will all be discovered. For our physical assets, we'll pull in the hardware model. For a virtual machine, which we'll also take a look at, we will map that relationship back to the host so that you'll know exactly what VMs are running on which physical hosts. And we'll also tell you which virtual platform, which virtual type those VMs are running on. Scrolling down, there's metadata that I can add to the devices, either through discovery, manually through the UI, the API, or that spreadsheet option. So if there are tags that I want to assign to a device that I can use later for reporting or filtering purposes, I can do that. If there are notes that I want to assign to the device, I can also do that here as well. And then location details, including a rack or the building or the room that it might be located in. Device42 will also keep track of when that device was first added into the system, as well as when it was last updated. This can be helpful just to understand, hey, if this device hasn't been updated in a few days, did something happen? Has it gone offline? Is it unavailable for whatever reason? Scrolling down, we get a ribbon about halfway through with a couple different tabs. This first tab, the properties tab, is going to detail resource information. So how much CPU, memory, and disk is allocated or installed on that particular machine. It will detail the operating system and the OS version, as well as connectivity information. So MAC addresses, associated IPs, port, subnet, VLAN information, as well as physical connectivity. If network devices are discovered in the environment, such as a network switch, Device42 will start to look at the MAC, ARP, and IP tables and correlate that physical connectivity across the environment so that you can understand what is plugged in to what port on what switch. From there, what we call an impact chart is generated, which will give you a visual representation of, again, everything that's plugged in. So what I've done is pulled up that particular impact chart for a switch in our environment here. And it's gonna show me everything that has an active connection, something actively plugged into any of its ports. So here is the switch that I pulled up. all of these ports here have something actively plugged into them. And then from there, I can trace the connectivity to any of the other devices in the environment. So if I go from our switch here, whoops, to this gigabit Ethernet port, to a couple of other things that had at one point been plugged into this switch. And so for example, here's another ESXi host, a different one that we looked at previously, but it's also got a bunch of underlying VMs running on it. So now I can understand if this port that this ESXi host is if that port that it's plugged into goes down, rather, excuse me, then not only will this host be affected, but all of these underlying VMs are going to be affected as well. So that could be important from a change management or incident management perspective. If things are going to be moved, you don't want to disrupt your application workflow. Looking through some of the other tabs here, the Lifecycle tab here lets you track anything that happens to a device, its current status, anything that's going on with it throughout its lifecycle. You can define a new lifecycle event at any point by going into the edit mode and clicking on the green plus button that we'll see here. And that will let me add a new event, give it a timestamp, associate an end user from it. We have an Active Directory LDAP sync. You can pull end users from those systems and then assign them to these devices for ownership or management, maintenance, anything like that. And then I'll select a event from the drop-down list here, of which there are several that come out of the box, but you also have the capability to define your own lifecycle event. This is nice because it can allow you to trigger additional actions when this event is applied. So if I want to create a new event that's called decommissioning or retiring, I can give it a name and then determine, all right, since it's going into storage or being decommissioned, I can clear IP and connectivity information. I can change the service level, remove it from a rack, put it in a storage room. All of this can be automated as just part of that lifecycle event application. I did mention earlier a warranty sync discovery option. If you have Dell, IBM, Lenovo, or Meraki equipment, we'll take the serial numbers of the devices in your Device42 instance and then hit the vendor's APIs and pull in purchase and support information. So then that way you can always be aware of the different contract and service types that you have in the environment, the start and end dates. You can generate reports on anything that's coming end of life or end of support in the next 6 months so that you can be ready to renew those contracts if necessary. And then a purchase order is also created that ties together all of the related objects and line items. So here's everything that's associated with this Dell purchase order. I can then assign a cost center. I can upload a PDF version of the invoice. Has this cost been completed, or this order been completed rather? What was the total cost and any additional metadata that I might want to add? I'm going to hop back into the view mode here, and then we can take a look at a virtual machine. And so this is a list, a list of all the virtual machines discovered on this particular ESXi host. Pretty simple list, just kind of indicating what the current status of it is, what operating system it's running, and when it was last updated in Device42. So up to date here. Discovery was ran earlier this morning. I can jump down into any of these virtual machines and get a closer look. So again, Device42 is not playing favorites in any sense when it comes to kind of device type or operating system. So we get a lot of that same good information that we saw on the physical host in terms of inventory data. So the host name, here's that VM to host relationship I mentioned, the platform that it's running on, as well as all the same resource information in terms of operating system and connectivity. This is where Device42 can also start to get a bit deeper into the systems. So the software discovery module will allow you to pull in any of the installed software packages on the system. It will be things that are managed on the Linux side by a package manager like apt or yum, as well as anything on the Windows side that you find in the add or remove programs feature. So things that are installed by some kind of executable or MSI installer. And so again, this is showing me all the locally installed software on this particular system. If I wanted to take a broader look and see all the software or running services across the environment, I can come into the resources section. This is essentially the CMDB portion of Device42. Each column is broken out into different portions of what I would say Device42 kind of tracks. So this left-hand column is the compute section and resource section, which is where you'll see a lot of your devices, a lot of the different resources, including cloud resources and storage arrays. The second column is the network section. So this is going to relate to any kind of network schema and information in your environment, including subnets, IP addresses, DNS records, and zones, which can be pulled through discovery, as well as cloud network environments like a VRF or excuse me, a VPC in AWS. The third column is storage related, including arrays, databases, and containers. And then the fourth column is services and operating systems, as well as software. So back to the software piece here. If I wanted to take a closer look at any of these software components, I can jump down into one of these records and get a better understanding of how prevalent this is in the environment here. This particular piece of Python software has been discovered 28 times. If I scroll down towards the bottom, I can see exactly the different versions that have been discovered, as well as what devices they've been found on. So this Device42 can pretty quickly get you an accurate inventory of not just the software that's deployed across the environment, but the different versions that are out there as well. What you can also do is track licensing information in Device42. So if I go into the edit mode here, what I can do is modify the license count. So let's say I purchased 100 licenses of whatever particular software component I'm looking at. I can then apply a license model to it. This will then determine how this discovered count is incremented anytime the software is found in the environment. So there are about 15 or 16 of these available out of the box, but this is another case where you can define new license models as well, new objects. So several of these at the bottom are new ones that were created in this Device42 instance. If I jump into the green plus buttons here, I can define that new license model. So it lets me determine how I want to track it, whether it's by user or client access or the number of cores per CPU, where I can further define, is it by volume? Is it by OEM? What's the core factor, number of cores versus number of sockets, so on and so forth. Once I save that and apply it, anytime the software is discovered in the future, as well as the existing software instances, this count here is again incremented based on that. So it helps to give you a more accurate count of your license consumption for whatever software license agreement you have. You can then set up email alerts to let you know when you've reached 75% consumption of this total license count. So then from there, you can run a report. Maybe there are some servers recently that you have decommissioned that might have this software package on it that now that license can be freed up and applied elsewhere so that you don't have to, put in a new order for additional licensing. Anytime any of that software is running as a service, Device42 will pull in information related to that as far as the running process and listening IP and port information. We'll circle back to this in a minute when we take a look at some of the application dependency mapping, but just know that on the local level for an individual machine, you can't see what's installed from a software and running service perspective. And then lastly, here are mount points for your devices. So storage locally to the device, not necessarily a storage array. It could be a remote mount point though. So something on another system somewhere, an NFS mount point for an example. So what this is doing though is showing how much space is available, the file system type in use, mount point names, drive letters would show here for your Windows devices. So your C drive, your D drive, and so on. All right, so another key component of Device42 is our ability to perform application dependency mapping. And so what that looks like, there's going to be a couple different components to it that I'll touch on quickly today, but this is sort of the ground layer of the application dependency mapping within Device42. The other components are built on and iterated upon, or iterated off of this. This, I'd like to say, is good for engineers because typically if there's a connection or a communication, it's going to show up here. There's not a lot of filtering that's done inherently. And you can also add some filters of your own a little bit. But for the most part, if you want to see what's communicating, this is where I would suggest going for that. So this chart is focusing on a new device we're looking at here, a MySQL system. And it's the green circle on the left-hand global view here. The global view is a high-level look at what is communicating to that target server. The local view is focusing on that same device represented as the brown box here, and the local view is starting to dig into what those dependencies, what those service communications are actually based on. And so again, our focal point, our target device is the brown box here, this MySQL server. These green boxes are other systems that are communicating to it, and then the purple circles on each of these boxes are service instances of some kind of running piece of software, right? So we've got a Java instance here with a couple of devices communicating to it, as well as a MySQL process with a Tomcat server talking to it. And so you can see I can hover over the different objects here and jump to the device record page. If I want to see a topology chart for another system, I can do that right from here. If I want to get more details on these service instances, I can see a little bit of that here, but I promised we'd come back and take a closer look at some of this as well earlier. And so now I can get the full details about this running MySQL instance on that MySQL server. So I get a little bit more information about my database there. So I can start to see things like the command arguments, the service path that it's executed from, the state of the service at the last time of the discovery, what its start mode is, as well as the user context. This can definitely be helpful from a security perspective. So for example, why is this MySQL service here running as a root user? Is there not a service account that either can be used or provisioned to perform the same action without so much privilege? Client and listener details will also be captured. And so it's listening on this local loopback IP here for the MySQL or the MySQL system. It's listening on the default MySQL port, and then here is a client IP address that is an incoming communication to this MySQL system, which, if we jump back to the chart, is mapped to the server here. And so this chart here is initially showing us what is communicating directly to our target server. But what I can do is hover over this Tomcat system and then expand that connectivity chain. So I can start to work my way up the application stack and see, exactly what is functioning as part of these servers or potentially this application. And so we've got the database tier running MySQL on one end here. We've got the Tomcat system running as middleware. And then on the front end, we have this Apache server with quite a few different end user devices potentially that are communicating, right? So some Windows systems here, as well as some other devices, a Firefox client potentially as well that's communicating to it. And so again, this is still all coming in through the agentless discovery of Device42 SSH or WMI primarily for Linux and Windows respectively. We build these charts out using netstat and PS as a big source of that. We're looking at the PIDs that match the services and the IP port pairs that those services are listening on, and then correlate that communication across the estate between the different devices. And so again, this chart I like to say is good for engineering just because it is going to really show you almost all the communication that's happening. It can become a bit messy pretty quickly. I've only expanded 2 devices here, and we're already starting to get quite a few different communications, quite a few different devices that are involved here. So if there is a really chatty application, or maybe there's a monitoring agent in the environment that's reaching out to everything, it might be a little bit overwhelming to work with, right? It turns into a bit of a plate of spaghetti. So what we did is come up, excuse me, with what we call affinity groups. And the intention here is to really parse out a lot of the unnecessary noise and focus on application-centric related communications. And so what I'm doing is pulling up an affinity group chart for that same MySQL server that we were just looking at. And right away, there's probably a couple of key differences that you can kind of walk away with, right? So firstly, it's starting with just the global view, so that high-level look at what is communicating to that target server, that MySQL system that we've been working with. Next, it is showing me several layers deep of communication. I didn't have to hover over a device and hit expand. Based on the service communications that Device42 sees within these devices, as well as some kind of built-in intelligence, it's mapping this out automatically. So I can see, several layers deep of communication to that same Tomcat and Apache server, as well as those end user devices that were communicating to that web host. I can still get that granular level of detail if I click on the arrow and see those service processes that we saw earlier, as well as the applications that are running on them, the application components on the database or the middleware tier. There is also a nice timeline at the top here to indicate the complexity of this group of application or servers and their communications. So we are at today's timestamp. This is the current state of the communications between these devices. But if I start to go back, 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, I can really see how this has changed in complexity over that time frame. So going back to the point of inception for this group of servers or this application. This view has a little bit more customization and flexibility as opposed to the previous view that we saw. There is a process called pinning and starring of services. It's basically a way to highlight services you want to include within the communication chart here. Device42 has a list of services that it knows to look for to include it in these charts automatically, but it also allows the user the option to say, all right, I want to make sure that these services are also highlighted because it's a support service that I know is important to the way this application functions. But Device42 doesn't know that. So you can effectively teach Device42 to learn what running processes or service instances on your systems or applications are important, and then Device42 will include those in further creations of the charts here. There's also an object query language called DOCL that we use with the internal database on Device42, but it's also used for a host of other things, including reporting, which we'll also touch on today. This chart is generated using a calculation created by one of those DOCL queries. So there's probably about 10 or so out of the box that you can choose from. You can also modify those for custom ones or create new ones from scratch. And what those allow you to do is to really filter or hone in on what you want to see on these charts. Do you want to see only a specific operating system? Do you want to include IPv6 communications? Do you want to see service communications going back 30 days, 60 days, all the way back to the point that Device42 was stood up? So that's another way for you to kind of modify and determine what shows up on these charts compared to the topology chart that we looked at earlier, where it's really just kind of showing you all the service communications. All right, so from there, what I'm going to do is shift gears a little bit into some of the storage. And so what I can do is come back into the resources section. So again, remember, this is kind of the CMDB portion of Device42, and I'll come into the arrays. And actually, but first, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about how the storage discovery is performed. It's pretty straightforward. Again, we try to make the discovery very simple and easy. As we saw before, this is going to be even simpler and easier than that, I would think. So again, this is a dedicated storage array discovery job. And these are the different storage arrays that are currently supported. So NetApp, Pure Storage, Dell Compile, and a couple of different Dell options, Data Domain, excuse me, Isilon, Nutanix as well. So it's our coverage of different storage arrays is growing all the time. If there are storage platforms you're using in the environment that you don't see, let us know. We're definitely happy to have a conversation and build out additional support. We're looking for feedback on this module all the time. But again, what you'll need to create this job is give it a name, select one of the options from the platform drop down here, select a remote collector. A remote collector is really just a secondary collection appliance. It's another pre-configured virtual appliance Device42 uses to offload that discovery burden. In the case of storage discovery, it is required. And then enter in your credentials here. Device42 also has a performance monitoring module for the storage array. So this will give you metrics into the IOPS, the read write, the number of read writes for your storage arrays, and whatever else might be available. It depends on the platform that's being targeted. And that's it. That will get you storage discovery up and running. And again, we do recommend running on a schedule just to keep that inventory information fresh and up to date. So once you have storage running in your environment, remember again, we've come into the resources section and then storage arrays. This is a list view of all of the different storage arrays that have been discovered in this particular instance. So this is something that's customizable. This view might look a little bit different as well. It's a different framework that we're using. It's a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more flexible. And so you can kind of determine what it is that you want to look at or see from this view here in terms of storage arrays. So what I'm going to do is take a look at our NetApp array in our environment. And so the way that this view, the resources section works here is that on the left-hand side, I'm getting details about the top level resource that I've picked up. So that's going to be the NetApp array in this case. The right-hand side is going to be related resources to that top level resource. So in the case of this top level array, it's going to be things like the LUNs that are associated with it, the file systems, the disk, the aggregate, lots of different information that's going to be available and tied to this NetApp array. So, excuse me, looking at the inventory information for our NetApp, we can see things like the model, the serial number, the version, the status, and the uptime. This is something that the standard discovery of Device42 doesn't provide for anything else. So this is kind of something different and nice in terms of storage discovery. Lots of information around capacity in terms of the raw data, the percent free versus percent used, thin provisioning information, resources for things like number of CPU, disks, and LUNs, as well as some more capacity information down here at the bottom, the board speed, the cache type, as well as custom fields and more related resources down here at the bottom. And so what I can do from here is, let's take a look at a LUN to get some information related to that. And then we can take a look at some of the mapping as well that Device42 does around storage array. So again, details for our LUN, our Esxi LUN here, in terms of capacity, how big is it, what's the path, is it thin provision, what's the technology that it's using. Maybe this storage array has been seeing some latency issues. Device42 can provide insight into what technology it's using. It's using SATA 7K here, possibly. Maybe that's something that needs to be investigated as far as those latency issues go. Here are some of those related resources again to the Esxi LUN here, an initiator group and a volume as well, and a hypervisor disk. And so what I'll do is now click on this resource map, where you can start to see something similar to the application dependency mapping, but from the storage perspective. And so now here is that top level array, NetApp array that we looked at earlier, as well as the Esxi LUN and some other objects that are associated with it, as well as some disks. And so similar to the way I was able to build out the connectivity chain on the topology chart or the affinity group, see a couple layers deep of that communication, I can do something similar on the storage array here. So now we've got our LUN, or our array to our LUN, to our fiber channel, to the Esxi host that this is all connected to, this is the storage that this host is relying on. I can expand that once more and start to see the different data stores that the Esxi host uses to store things like VMs or ISOs. And then from there, I can see the virtual hard disks and volumes that that particular data store is using. So if I click here, I can start to see, the different information related to what VM might be using that particular hard disk. And so this is letting you correlate, all right, there was a failure with this application. Was it storage or compute related? Wasn't compute related? What happened to the disk or the data store that maybe that VM and that application is relying on? So Device42 provides a central location for a lot of that information within the platform. And if I go back to the storage array view here real quickly, what I want to do as well is just touch on some of the trends information here. And so again, just remember, I mentioned this during the discovery job portion, Device42 is collecting metrics from the arrays on a variety of different things. So you can see here, read data rates, latency, write rates. So Device42 is periodically reaching out to the device and gathering metrics on how this is being utilized. So, the storage vendor is probably also going to provide a tool like this, and it's definitely going to be a bit more granular than something Device42 does. But what Device42 offers is, again, a central place to see all this information. And this metrics view here also offers a way to get insight into the storage trends in your environment. So kind of identifying space issues when there are some, or latency issues like we're seeing here. Do extra resources need to be allocated to the storage array? And if something is happening in terms of latency and you want to take a closer look, a more detailed look, that's when you can know to jump into the storage provided or the vendor provided storage tool. All right. So the last thing I want to touch on here is around reporting. Device42 is gathering a lot of data within your environment and again, kind of centralizing it within the Device42 platform. We are not trying to be a walled garden or lock it within the Device42 platform. So there's absolutely a lot of different ways that you can take advantage of that information. I touched on, I touched on the API before as an option to not only get data into the Device42 platform, but you can also get it out of the system using that as an option. I also mentioned DOCL earlier. So DOCL is the Device42 object query language. It's a SQL compliant language that we use with the affinity groups that we looked at earlier. We use it with the reporting here, but we also do expose the database schema that that SQL compliant language is associated with. So if you are familiar with SQL, here's the data dictionary. These are all the views that sit on top of those database tables. So if you are familiar with SQL, it's all going to use that same SQL syntax. So you can write your own queries and get really granular details and information about anything you might be looking for within the Device42 instance. So for example, this is the view or the table that relates to the device object. And these are all the columns in that table. So this is telling me what it's called, what data type is it, and the information that it's providing. So again, it's a good way, a really powerful way to get information out of Device42 and create reports or extract it for ingestion into other platforms. But it's not a requirement. SQL can be have a bit of a learning curve. I'm by no means an expert, but it is something that I do take advantage of. The Device42 does offer some built-in reporting options as well. This is a BI tool called Exago, one of our partners that we integrated right into Device42 as part of the core functionality. I can come into the system here and create a new report at any time, a custom report. And so if I select the advanced report as an option, what it lets me do is select the data objects that I want to report on. These are just the CI types within Device42. And in fact, what these are is that they map right back to those same views that we saw in the data dictionary. So if I want to grab the device view as an example, and maybe the software that's installed, I can double click or drag and drop. It's very easy to get things into the report that I want to select. I hit OK, and then I can pick and choose any of the fields that I want to report on. And so these fields, you might recognize, map back to those columns that we saw for that view in the data dictionary. So what this advanced reporting tool is really a visual version or a GUI of that same object query language. So if I want to pick and choose anything that I might want here, I'll go into software and add some of that as well. Again, this is a way to build fresh reports from the ground up to fit your use case or your needs and get really specific in terms of the information that comes back. And then from here, once I've gathered all the requirements, I can reformat it, change the font size, the font color, the column headers, rename it, add filters or sorting options. Lots of different capabilities are available for this. We do also have a pretty comprehensive set of predefined reports. So these are our canned reports that are available right out of the box. As soon as you have data, you can start running them. Each of the subfolders in the predefined reports folder is a use case that we find Device42 helps out with a lot. So everything from your application dependency mapping to database discovery, hardware and software inventory. So we've got a physical inventory as well as a software inventory here, network utilization. These are all, again, available out of the box, and you can start trying these out as soon as you got information. And in fact, here's a storage array report as well that we can take a look at. So what I'll do is try the data store overview and display it right on screen here. So I can run it right within the Device42 window, but I can also export it to PDF, CSV, Excel, and RTF as well. So this is a kind of an overview of the different data stores that are available within Device42. So depending on the information that's collected and what's available, you'll get different information here. The nice thing too about these predefined reports is that they make good templates. So maybe you want to hit the ground running with your reporting. You don't have time to really learn the SQL syntax or the advanced reporting tool. What you can do is maybe you ran the all devices report, find it fits most of your needs, but there's some things you want to remove, some things you want to add. You can click on the hamburger icon and duplicate it into a user folder and then modify it. So then from there, you can really make it your own and kind of customize it, not in terms of just the presentation, but also the data that's shown in that particular report. So I can make a copy of that all devices report into the user defined folder and then modify it as needed. And then also we do have an Odbc Jdbc connector, so that if you're using anything like Power BI or Tableau in the environment, already today you can feed data into those platforms and make some really nice dashboards and reports, presentations, and tools like that as well. We do have a couple different Power BI templates that we'd be happy to share to help you get started around things like hypervisor density and resource utilization and overall data insights into your, your IT estate or your environment. So that was all I had, Ryan. If there's anything else that you wanted me to cover, yeah.
No, that's perfect. And I'll go and take care of the screen share from here and pick up on my side. Thank you so much for that, Ian. That's super insightful. Let's see. And just checking everybody can see this, correct?
Looks good.
Cool. Awesome. And carry on the webinar. So Ryan Cooper, Director of Ecosystem here at Device42. I am in charge of enabling our partners like Abraham's Consulting, going to market and building your business with us. So really quick, kind of what to reiterate what Ian was saying. Device42, obviously, it's a secure end-to-end agentless discovery and dependency mapping platform. We discover everything, we inventory everything. We're going to document and analyze those discoveries. And we're going to map those dependencies between services and applications. So common use case for this is going to be service deliveries, setting it for migrations, modernizations, updating compliance and audits, quite a few different options there. A big takeaway from this slide is going to be being hybrid. There's a lot of tools that discover on-prem, but don't discover anything in the cloud, and only discover in the cloud, but don't discover anything on-prem, and maybe a few in between, but nothing truly that goes up in the entire stack like Device42 does. So device discovery is what we're known for, but we can really do so much more besides that. A bit about Device42, formed in 2011. Raj Jalan is our CEO. Didn't have a tool or really method to understand devices and assets within data centers. So he actually formed Device42. So he found a pain point within the industry and made his own company out of it. And it's been very successful since. Since then, we've accumulated over 20,000 active customers, expanded over 60 countries, and grew to over 200 global partners. And this is one of my favorite slides. It's a testimony to the customers that trust Device42 and the width in really everything that we cover as far as verticals go. Two verticals I want to highlight is going to be the government vertical, Department of Defense, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, Navy, as well as healthcare too. So we have a lot of big logos in there that trust Device42 and our capabilities and use us for that discovery component of their businesses. And this is another one as well that, the last slide shows the width of which Device42 can reach. This is going to show the depth that Device42 can reach. So a big strength is going to be obviously from the discovery portion of that, but we're going to be able to discover so much more deeper and broader than a lot of tools in the market there. So you can see we cover everything from legacy to modern, bare metal to cloud there, a ton of different discovery aspects there, and the abilities of Device42 can reach there. And we just covered the product by Ian, but really big differentiator by Device42 is our partner community. Abraham's Consulting being one of them is a highly valuable partner with us. Go to market all the time. We are a true partner first organization where 90% of that revenue comes through our partner channel. This is comprising of SIs, VARs, MSPs, distributors, and we actually compensate our sales reps more to leverage partners than doing a direct deal. So our sales reps are actually paid more, incentivized more to find partners to share leads with and opportunities with and go to market with. Another good thing about Device42 is the unique stage and maturity level we are. We have the agility and the positioning to really listen and actually implement what our partners and customers need out of the product. We're not a 1,000 person enterprise, and we can actually make decisions and changes quickly based on those needs. You won't really get that from any competitors that maybe were acquired by Microsoft or any other enterprises. The partner and customer truly dictates and evolves the product to suit their needs. We're not a SaaS model. We get delivered on either an annual basis or a project-based basis. That's something sales can cover on a separate call, but we do have approximately 95% renewal rate with those customers, which is something we take a lot of pride in. We are an ISV, so we don't have any professional services offerings. That's where we rely on our partners like Abraham's Consulting to partner with and deliver their services for mutual customers. We really value those relationships and really invest heavily in those partnerships. Let's see. And a bit about the partnership overview, just a few quick incentives here and benefits. So revenue incentives is a big thing. So we do have an increasing discount level as you do more business with us. It's a tiered model. We have the licensing and project license flexibility, SPIFs for training resources. We have a whole marketing team, technical team, and sales team available for your fingertips, basically. Whenever you need support there, we can offer it. Either align with Abraham's Consulting or Device42 directly, and we will make sure it gets done. And one last slide. One of the last slides is common challenges we see in the market. What challenges are you facing? What brought you here? Is it a storage challenge? Is it a discovery challenge? Is it any hardware challenge? But really taking an inventory on what is, what a pain point for you is and how we can both mutually with Abraham's Consulting go in and deliver that value and solve those pain points for you. And going wrapping up this webinar really quick, I'll leave it off with some partner resources here. Anybody available can ping Abraham's Consulting or Device42. We're more than happy to share these slide decks with you, schedule free demos, talk to sales, talk to technical resources. Ian and I are always available, and Abraham's Consulting is available as well. We do host live demos 10 a.m. Central Standard Time every Wednesday, but please ping Device42 or Abraham's Consulting again, and we'll make sure to set up a more one-on-one session with you, understand your problems or understand your challenges, I should say, and make sure we both deliver value and solve those challenges. So that's a wrap from the Device42 side. Ian, thank you so much for joining. That was awesome demo you had there. From Abraham's Consulting, maybe a few final words from your side.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan and Ian, for your presentation. It was quite valuable. And for those of you who actually saw the presentation live or will be seeing it on replay, you can certainly reach out to me directly at abrahamsconsulting.com or 718-979-1371. We work very closely with Device42 and we'll be more than happy to assist. Thank you so much again, guys, and we'll talk next time.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.